Hey guys, welcome back to Container Crops, the Scaredy Cat Gardener. It's a beautiful day today in Zone 7B, and we're going to be talking about how and when to water our container gardens. Oh my goodness, it's one of the most important things you can learn about container gardening because, well, it's the one thing that's going to get your plants growing. So, without further ado, let's get started.
Show off your fantasy reality, whoa. That's yours, but I'll keep doing mine. You'll be living your good life, catch a glimpse from the outside all the time.
Okay guys, we are back, and before we get started, if you are new to the channel, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. Take a second and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you won't miss anything. And then hang around because I've got a lot to share with you all about container garden. Okay, so how and when do we water our container gardens? Well, it's really not rocket science, but it is something to learn and to take into consideration. First and foremost, a lot of it depends on the size of your pots that you're growing in and your environment, your zone where you're located in, the temperatures, the humidity, and the air. But the one thing you want to do is make sure you check your plants until you know what plants you're growing and the requirements of each and every plant. You want to check your plant. You can't go out and assume that, oh, I watered yesterday, it's 5 o'clock, I need to water again. That will get you in trouble because each plant requires a certain amount of water, and each plant is going to soak up that water at a different rate of speed. So I'm going to show you I'm going to bring you in a little closer and show you how to check for when your plants need water. Okay, so a lot of us come outside and we look at our plants just like this one and we say, oh my goodness, it's dry, I need to water. Maybe, maybe not. What you need to do is check the soil. You're going to have to stick your finger in just probably up to the first knuckle and see if it's wet. And actually, this soil is damp, so I wouldn't come out and water it. It's damp down in here. And if you can see it as I move it around, I'm not sure if you can see it or not, but it's darker. It's darker. The surface of your soil, when it's good and dry, it will be a light color. When it's wet, moist, it's going to be a darker color. It doesn't matter what soil you're using. The top is going to be drier and light in color, and it's going to be moist and darker in color. But you need to check, and not just one plant. You need to come over and you need to check every plant, because as you can look at this one, if you can see in the camera, this soil is a little bit darker. And it's actually, let me come into focus, it's a little bit darker. It's actually damp on the soil surface. Each plant is different. Every plant is going to require a different amount of water. Okay, if you are new to container gardening, until you become seasoned with the actual plants that you are growing, it is best to go around and stick your finger in each and every container that you have, because it's also going to depend on the material of the container, how it's going to be absorbing the water every time you water it. As an example, if you have any hanging baskets, they're going to dry out much faster than your ones sitting on the ground, simply because the air is going to dry them out. Yes, we need air circulation, but when you're gardening in containers, air can dry your plants out really, really fast. Another thing to take into consideration, the rain. Just because it rains does not mean you don't need to water. Unless you've got a long, steady downpour of rain over a good period of time, like half a day or maybe a whole day, if you have a little shower, 15-minute shower, even if it's a downpour, don't assume that your plants don't need watering, because they probably do. What happens is, most of the time, if your plant is growing upwards and outwards, then the foliage on the plant is creating an umbrella, so to speak. And that umbrella is not allowing that rainwater to actually get to the root system of your plant. So you need to come out when it stops raining and check your plants. I would give it an hour or so after a rain and come out and check. Check the soil just like we did before. Do the finger check and see if your plants need watering. Just because it rained doesn't mean it doesn't need any water. Now, when you're actually watering your plants, you want to make sure that you get the complete root system watered. So you can't just water on the surface and say, okay, well, this plant says it only needs 2 inches of rain. A deep water is much better than a short, shallow water or a couple of cups of water. When you get a deep water to your plants, you're watering the whole entire root system. What you want to do is, your plants definitely need the drainage hose in it. You want to water your plants until the water comes out of the bottom of the container, no matter what. If your plant doesn't need but a couple of inches, that's just going to mean you're not going to need to water as often. But when you do water, you need to give it a good deep water. Let that water drain out. When you can see it coming out of the bottom of your pot, then you know you've got the entire root system covered. Because otherwise, if you're just pouring maybe a cup or a pitcher of water on the top, on the surface, and a few days go by, if that plant doesn't get that cup of water, it's going to start looking like it. It's going to start being all limp. And speaking of being limp, that's another thing you want to look for. Look at the foliage on your plant. It's going to tell you that it needs water. It shouldn't get to the point that it looks like it, but if your leaves are limp and just kind of hanging over, it's thirsty. Feed it. It needs some water. So look at your actual overall plant as well. It's going to tell you a lot. And another tip, plants in containers sometimes, especially smaller pots, can dry out really quick. And a lot of potting soil mixes can dry out tremendously fast. If you look at your container garden, your plants that are in containers, and the soil has pulled away from the sides of the container, then that means it is bone dry. I mean bone dry. And at that point, you need to rehydrate that plant. So what you're going to need to do is, and if you look at it, and I don't have any that are like that to show you because, well, I keep buying hydrated, but when the soil gets dry, it pulls away from the sides. Have you ever baked a cake and the cake starts to cool down? And as it starts to cool down, it pulls away from the sides of the cake pan. If you know what that looks like, it's the same look. What you need to do is rehydrate. You're going to have to do one of two things. If the pot is small enough, you can get a larger pot or a bucket and sit it down in that pot and leave it there for a few hours. Not covering the top of it. You don't want the water to cover the top, but you want to sit it in enough water, maybe halfway up that pot, so that the water can soak up through the bottom of that pot and start to rehydrate that plant. If you don't have that, or your pot is too big, then you're going to have to water. You want to water it really good until that water comes out of the bottom of that pot. Wait about an hour, come back out, water it again, and continue to do that until it's rehydrated. Now, how do you know it's rehydrated? Once that pot or that plant is rehydrated, then the soil will go back up against the pot. It's going to relax, it's going to be moist, and it's going to be touching the entire rim of the pot again, and it's going to look moist as well. So pay attention to those areas as well. Now over here, as you can see, I have a much larger container, and the size of your container is going to matter as well. These large containers over here, and I have 3 of them, these large containers, they don't need nearly as much water as some of my smaller containers, like just my standard red container. It doesn't need nearly as much water, and it certainly doesn't need as much water as the grow bag does. And I'm going to talk about the grow bag in just one moment. But these containers, these large, big brown containers, as you can see, this soil is pretty dark. It's damp compared to the soil in my red containers. I don't water these nearly as much. So if you're growing in containers and you have a time restraints where you can only water a certain amount of time, your best bet is to get larger containers. The larger your containers are, the less you're going to have to water. That soil is heavy, it's dense, and it's holding moisture. And it's not holding moisture because it has nowhere to vent or run out, because they each have a spout right here, and my spout is always left loose, where when there's too much water, it drains out. Also, in this particular container, it has this little thing right here, whereas when there's too much water in the container, this little thing will, and it used to have a little green thing on it, but this will rise. This will rise, giving you an indication of the level. Now, every pot doesn't have that, but mine do. But the larger containers, they don't need watering nearly as much as the smaller ones. And speaking of watering a lot, these grow bags always seem to need quite a bit of attention. And one thing that you can do for a grow bag is to water the outside of the actual bag. If you water the outside of the actual bag, that will help it retain moisture too. Now, another thing that you need to pay attention to is your zone, your environment, the temperatures, the air. All of that matters when it comes to container gardens. Now, you may say, well, I watch the temperatures. It's supposed to be 90 degrees all week, so I better water, or it's going to be 70. I'm good. I don't need to water. That's not necessarily so. You want to pay attention to your weatherman, but you also want to pay attention to your own sky. Take a look up. Does it look cloudy? Does it look humid? Does it look moist? Look at the trees, the general nature that's in your area, the things that you're not growing. Are they looking limp? Are they looking healthy? Pay attention to that. The temperature of your area is not always given by the meteorologists. You want to pay attention to your own sky and what's going on in your zone. Also, you want to pay attention to the humidity. Every day it may be a little bit more humid than the next day, or one day I should say it should be maybe a little bit more humid than the next day. Pay attention to the humidity, because sometimes when it's really humid outside, the leaves, the foliage on your plants are not able to soak up all the water you're going to need to water. You're going to need to water. Now, when is the best time to water? Personally, and as a matter of fact, not just personally, but everything that I am telling you today, this is based off of my experience and my experience alone. The first year that I was gardening, oh my goodness, I thought that because it's hot outside and I'm hot, I was thirsty, then my plants were too. So I watered and well, I lost everything. That year I lost everything. So that was the year I said, okay, you know what? I need to research. I need to figure out what I need to do, because this apparently wasn't it. After that, it's been success when it comes to watering. Now, I like to water first thing in the morning. It gives the time for the foliage to dry out before night. When you water late in the evening, I wouldn't suggest watering past 6:30 or 7, your zone time, at any time. The reason being is because sometimes, not always, but sometimes when you water late, your foliage stays wet, which will make it more susceptible to disease by it being wet overnight. So you want it to be able to dry out during the day, not dry out to the point where it just needs much more watering, but you want your foliage to dry. So first thing in the morning is when I like to water, preferably my zone time around between 8 and 9 a.m. That's a perfect time for me. Now, I will come back out if it's a really, really hot day, and I will check it again about 4 or 5, and I'll try to get another watering in on those days that I really need to water twice. I will try to get another watering in somewhere between 5 and 6 p.m. in the evening, but I will not water after 6 p.m. unless my plant is just desperately needing water. And you can tell if the leaves are just all crinkled up and it looks like it needs to be watered. I'll water it then, but truth of the matter is, if you miss that evening water, your plants will probably survive just fine overnight, because the temperatures do cool down. No matter how hot it is, they typically cool down a few degrees at least overnight. So I hope that most of these tips are helpful to you guys, and you got something out of it, leave me some comments down below. How are you watering? What are your success? And do you have any more tips about watering in containers? Again, if you are new to the channel, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. Don't forget to turn on that notification bell so you won't miss anything. I've got a lot more subjects just like this to cover, so we'll be covering them off and on, as well as going through our garden. Okay, I think that's going to do it for today. Don't forget to thumbs up the video and share it out. I really would appreciate it. And until next time, remember, anywhere you can sit a pot, you can grow a plant. And I'll see you on the trail.
You'll be living your good life. Catch a glimpse from the outside all the time.